Barnaby Joyce says the Nationals need to speak up, that the battle for rural votes has never been harder. The Nationals' once solid base has been eroded by the emergence of the Shooters and Fishers Party, One Nation and moderate populists like Jackie Lambie. Barnaby Joyce knows what's happening.
We are being attacked on all sides, whether it's Shooters and Fishers, One Nation, whether it's independents, and we have to speak with our own voice in an honest and forthright way, because that's actually how we'll keep a coalition government.
That's code for saying we need to assure you, our base, we're not the lackeys of the Libs, and we are still your best bet in the bush. After a nightmare summer of fire and floods, some farmers and regional communities are incandescently angry. They feel neglected, let down, and in need of someone to forcefully carry their message to the nation. They want more than platitudes. The once great Australian Country Party used to be about supporting the toil, the needs and the values of regional Australia. A party that produced leaders who placed a steadying hand on the shoulder of the Liberals. These days, the Nationals are beset with scandal and accusations of rorts, mismanagement, leadership squabbles and disunity. Meanwhile, their constituents, who have been taken for granted for too long, are truly suffering. They feel let down. It's time for the Nats to break out of the coalition to realise their power. Else they need to be prepared to face oblivion in their safe electorates by new personalities who are offering policies and plans to combat rural challenges. Power and influence for the Nats during this era of tight elections will come from standing apart rather than behind the Liberal Party. It worked once upon a time in Western Australia, and as we saw at the last election, you do not mess with the quiet Australians in Queensland. It's time for the Nats to stop being the court jester of Australian politics and reposition themselves once again as the kingmakers in Canberra. Mr Bernardi, you of all people would know about political disunity. I'm keen to know your thoughts on where you think we go with the National Party.
I'm itching to get into this because no matter what dysfunction there may be in the National Party, I've never heard Jackie Lambie be called a moderate populist or have someone suggest that One Nation is less dysfunctional than the National Party.
True.
I mean, being in government, being a politician has with it some responsibilities. The minor parties you mentioned are never held to account for what they do or say. They contradict themselves from one day to the next. They're flouncing around saying they're economic conservatives and then they want, more economic socialism and a whole range of things that goes on and on and on.
But it's working for them. They're getting balances of power.
Because there's people that are unhappy with the status quo, but governing and doing the right thing by the country is different from coming out with some slogans.
Nothing gets done.
Well,
it's working for them, but it's not working for anyone else.
A lot of things did get done when there was a Senate crossbench where, like Kathy Indi had the Integrity Commission, Karen Phelps got across the...
don't talk to me about Medivac. What a waste of time that was.
Let's stick to the bush for a moment, right? Yeah. Just for a moment. I mean, I've seen some things happen in the Senate which is about grandstanding and posturing. And they don't read the legislation half the time, and then they turn up and vote and make a...
You're going to name names?
Well, you've named them, I think.
I'm the only person on this panel, I suspect, who lived through the era of the Country Party. I'm old enough to remember it. I come from country Queensland. My family were Country Party voters, and lest Paul Barry gets excited, I donated to the National Party. It's on the public record. So I'm a National Party donor, just so I don't end up on Media Watch. So what I'm about to say is from someone who cares about them. I think they've got a problem with their leadership at the moment. I think, as nice a fellow as he apparently is, Michael McCormack hasn't got the cut through. But let's give him
He's got the personality of a piece of bread.
But does that necessarily mean he's any good? Are we equating...
He's already said, he's stated that he hasn't done anything. But
injection of reality, they held the line really admirably in a pretty tough election climate last year. They held their seats, and the last person to be lecturing anyone on relevance now is Barnaby, who's been burnt to the waterline by his own conduct. And I think there are much better voices in the National Party now, Matt Canavan being one. McCormack committed a terrible blunder in penalising the people who voted against him in the ballot, in my view. You've got really smart people, plausible people like Matt Canavan and Gillespie on the backbench who have been frozen out in a vendetta. But the Nats, the other thing I would say, Jenna, just in their defence, is that they're not just a country party anymore or a party of farmers. as George will tell you, George Christensen, whom I'm proud to call a friend, they're a party of miners as well.
Yeah.
The Queensland vote particularly was driven by a lot of miners who used to be CFMEU
And you know,
loyalists.
without the National Party, we would have had Kevin Rudd's emissions trading scheme.
Absolutely.
We would have had Julia Gillard's carbon trading scheme. They would have destroyed and decimated both those issues. Would have destroyed the coalition.
Those Queensland Nats are winning more mining votes now than their Labor Party counterparts. Yeah, George, despite all the drama that he went through, had a swing of, I think, 12.4% in Dawson.
The problem
they held the line really well.
That Jenna makes a good point. They're competing against
some really
the very vocal populists who have no policy solutions. And when you quiz them on it, and I have quizzed them on it on Sky and other places, you get vitriol and abuse back instead of rational argument. And, you know, demagoguery is about not having logical argument to support your policies.
We've all just described the cancer on the body politic as we know it in 2020. You know, and that's not an excuse, it's just an observation.
There's no nuance in
what Jenna described the Nats going through, you could equally apply in some measure to the Labor Party. Don't know their backside from their armpit, you know, and don't know who they are, what they stand for. Half the party wants this, half the party wants that. Mr Albanese, if it was one thing one day, they can't say, you know, net reduction by 2050, but it doesn't matter how we get there, she'll be right.
This is the thing for modern politics.
It's affecting everyone.
People will respect you. This is John Howard's great legacy, was that people will respect you, even if they disagree with you, if they think you're consistent in the application of principle.
And if you front up.
He was. And if you front up and say, I did a bit wrong.
Did not Mike Baird go to the election saying, here's the polls and wires, going to flog them and privatise them, that's what I'm going to do, vote for me or don't. I believe the electorate respects such transparency. I really do.
I would really caution against breaching the coalition, though. I would have to say, again...
Be a really good breakup.
It'd be very exciting, plenty to write about for you guys.
You can't help yourself.
But
that's in the headlines.
Way back in that era, in the Joe for PM push, I was actually a Labor Party Labor official in New South Wales, and we were rubbing our hands with glee. That gave... Bob Hawke was in terrible strife after 1986. You might remember he had to give a mini economic statement. He trailed badly, and then Joe split the coalition.
You've been on one interesting journey. Labor official to Nats donor.
Gender reassignment is nothing compared to going from the Labor Party New South Wales branch to being a mate of George Christensen. Let me tell you.
What do you think, Jenna? What do you think they should be doing if you were in charge of the Nats? If you were cracking that whip...
As a proud West Australian, and I've been talking to a number of country folk over the past couple of weeks as we're leading up to a West Australian election moving forward, and we had Brendan Grills, who was the former Nats leader back in the day, and that was around a decade ago when he was a kingmaker because he split the coalition.
Indeed he was.
Look, the WA Nats are now an absolute basket case in Western Australia right now, but back then he was adamant that he was going to deliver for the bush. And
Royalties for Regions was born.
Royalties for Regions. So he ended up taking the extra cash and sunk it all into regional and remote areas, and everyone you speak to said, look, we didn't need new roads, we didn't need putting up in our towns, but God, it just feels nice to be loved and to be seen and to be...
And it was the principle.
That would work for the Nats.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go to regional communities, people talk about health and they talk about infrastructure and they talk about the lack of opportunities. That would work for the Nats, and it's a positive way they can benefit Australia from being a bit...
The other thing I'd have to say, I think they need to be more distinct and strident. And again, putting a guy as articulate as Canavan on the out of the limelight is just dumb.
He did that himself.
He did, but he should have been promoted and brought back into the fold. The other thing that this is a state issue, but I think the worst kept secret in Canberra at the moment is there's probably going to be an Eden-Monaro by-election soonish. Every indication is that Mike Kelly isn't in the best of health and may well stand aside, and there'll be a by-election. And the New South Wales state leader of the Nats, Barilaro, is going to run. Now, the New South Wales Nats let down a lot of Conservative voters by waving through the abortion...
Well, the New South Wales Nats are another kettle of fish.
Indeed. But the Conservative backlash against the National Party for supporting the pro-choice vote that damaged Berejiklian badly, I think they were seen as betraying very Conservative voters on that position.
But don't you think Baralaro's had a great summer in terms of he was fronting up with bushfires?
That's true, and he would not vacate the leadership of the state party unless he thought he was a real chance.
Can I just say one other thing? Is Matt Canavan is doing a mighty job outside of Cabinet, because sometimes you need vocal forces, the voice of common sense, outside of the collective groupthink. And Matt will hate me saying that because he wants to go back in, I'm sure. But he is playing an important role, and that's, I think, important.
Agree. Totally.